Hello everyone, welcome back to Dopamine Biology. Please make sure to leave a like and a comment. Do not forget to subscribe. Today we will be talking about the differences and similarities between DNA and RNA. DNA and RNA are different from their structure, functions, and stabilities. They are involved in the maintenance, replication, and expression of genetic information. The DNA is amazing, holding the key to heredity. RNA is just as impressive, as it is pretty much running the show with DNA as the main star. Together, these molecules ensure that DNA is transcribed, the code is translated, and eventually a protein is made. DNA and RNA are very similar to each other, while they also manage to be different in just the right way. DNA is the genomic material in cells that contains the genetic information used in the development and functioning of all known living organisms. DNA replicates and stores genetic information that is used to make proteins. RNA, on the other hand, replicates and stores genetic information for some viruses, serving as a genetic material as well. RNA's primary function is to convert the genetic information contained within the DNA to a format used to build proteins and then move it to the ribosomal protein factories. RNA transfers the genetic code needed for the creation of proteins from the nucleus to the ribosome. This prevents the DNA from having to leave the nucleus, so it stays safe. Without RNA, proteins could never be made. DNA consists of two strands arranged in a double helix. RNA only has one strand, but like DNA, it is made up of nucleotides. These strands are made up of subunits called nucleotides. Each nucleotide contains a phosphate group, a 5-carbon sugar molecule, and one of 4 nitrogenous bases. DNA is a much longer polymer than RNA. A chromosome, for example, is a single long DNA molecule which would be several centimeters in length when unraveled. RNA molecules are variable in length but much shorter than long DNA polymers. A large RNA molecule might only be a few thousand base pairs long. RNA sometimes forms a secondary double helix structure, but only intermittently. The sugar in DNA is deoxyribose, which contains one less hydroxyl group than RNA's ribose. RNA contains ribose sugar molecules without the hydroxyl modification of deoxyribose. Both DNA and RNA have 4 nitrogenous bases, each 3 of which they share: cytosine, adenine, and guanine, and one that differs between the two. RNA has uracil, while DNA has thymine. DNA is found in the nucleus, with a small amount of DNA also present in organelles such as mitochondria and chloroplast. RNA forms in the nucleus and then moves to specialized regions of the cytoplasm depending on the type of RNA formed. Due to its deoxyribose sugar, which contains one less oxygen-containing hydroxyl group, DNA is a more stable molecule than RNA, which is useful for a molecule which has the task of keeping genetic information safe. RNA containing a ribose sugar is more reactive than DNA and is not stable in alkaline conditions. The carbon-hydrogen bonds in DNA make it fairly stable. Plus, the body destroys enzymes that would attack DNA. The oxygen-hydrogen bond in the ribose of RNA makes the molecule more reactive compared with DNA. RNA's larger helical grooves mean it is more easily subject to attack by enzymes. The small grooves in the DNA helix also serves as protection, providing minimal space for enzyme to attach. RNA is not stable under alkaline condition, plus the large grooves in the molecule make it susceptible to enzyme attack. RNA is constantly produced, used, degraded, and recycled. The complementary slight instability allows RNA to be flexible and more accessible and thus fold into meaningful structures, a property that can be fully appreciated in the proteins RNA makes. Due to the fragile nature of DNA, it resides within the nucleus where it is protected. DNA, for example, is vulnerable to damage by ultraviolet light. RNA is more resistant to damage from UV light than DNA. All right, a quick recap. The chemical structure of DNA is very similar to that of DNA, but differs in three primary ways. While the sugar phosphate backbone of DNA contains deoxyribose, RNA contains ribose instead. The complementary base to adenine in DNA is thymine, whereas in RNA it is uracil. Unlike double-stranded DNA, RNA is single-stranded molecule in many of its biological roles and consists of much shorter chains of nucleotides. Thanks for watching.